Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking about freedom schools. So you may have a few questions, some being what are freedom schools? What is the purpose of freedom schools? Are freedom schools still around? Who runs freedom schools? And are freedom schools good? I'm going to answer these questions today. So a few things we're going to go over are important people, important dates in a timeline, and we're going to go over the freedom school goals and the freedom school curriculum. Lastly, we're going to go over why this is important and what we can do about this, and there will be citations at the end. So, Ella Baker was born in 1903 and died in 1986. She was a civil rights and human rights activist. She began her activism in the NAACP and later formed the SNCC in 1960, and the SNCC created the Freedom Summer Program. Marian Wright Edelman, born in 1939 and is still alive, is a lobbyist, lawyer, and civil rights activist. She founded the CDF, the Children's Defense Fund, in 1973, and the CDF's mission is to ensure every child with a healthy start, a head start, a fair start, a safe start, and a moral start. So now we're going to look at our timeline, and this timeline goes all the way from 1960 to the present day. First up, in 1960, the SNCC was formed. This is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the SNCC sought to coordinate youth-led nonviolent direct action campaigns against segregation and other forms of racism. In 1961, the COFO, the Council of Federated Organizations, was formed, and this united several groups in the civil rights movement, including the SNCC, CORE, the NAACP, and the SCLC. This was sort of an umbrella organization. In 1963, Bob Moses, the director of the SNCC, proposed the Mississippi Freedom Summer Program. In the summer of 1964 was the Mississippi Freedom Summer Program. This was a political action program, a nonviolent effort by civil rights activists to integrate Mississippi's segregated political system. Its key idea was helping Black residents register to vote. Also in 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. This ended discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. In 1973, the CDF, the Children's Defense Fund, was founded by Marian Wright Edelman. The CDF is a nonprofit agency that advocates for children's rights, and it's still around today. In 1990, the BCCC, the Black Community Crusade for Children, was created by Dr. John Hope Franklin and Dr. Dorothy Height. The BCCC fights against obstacles that Black children face at disproportionate rates, like poverty and literacy. In 1995, the first official CDF, Children's Defense Fund Freedom Schools, were formed in Bennettsville, South Carolina, and Kansas City, Missouri. Today, there are freedom schools in 27 states and 182 sites. Since 1995, 150,000 children have been served by CDF Freedom Schools. And this summer, summer 2020, the first Freedom School in Charlottesville will be happening. Now we're going to look at the goals of Freedom Schools, then versus now. When Freedom Schools began, their long-term goal was to transform the power structure of Mississippi. Freedom Schools served multiple purposes in the civil rights movement and were a representation of community organizing, education for liberation, and activist development. More specifically, they focused on social change, history, students' experience, open-ended learning, and development of academic skills. Now, Freedom Schools serve as a counter-narrative for students, parents, communities, and the servant leader interns. They focus on 5 essential components: high-quality academic enrichment, parent and family development, civic engagement and social action, intergenerational servant leadership development, and lastly, nutrition, health, and mental health. As you can see, some of the underlying goals have been carried over, such as social change and social action, and academic skills and educational enrichment. Now we're going to be looking at the Freedom School curriculum. So there are 3 key pieces to the curriculum. First is the integrated reading curriculum. Next is the Freedom School Way or Freedom School family. And lastly is the method of teaching. First up is the IRC. This is the integrated reading curriculum. Today, the integrated reading curriculum is experienced through culturally relevant readings, pedagogy, and teaching practices. Next up, we have the Freedom School Way, or the Freedom School family. This is a teaching style that encourages positive support and values students' culture, and is the opposite of what traditional schools generally provide. This teaching style reinforces the ideas of community, village, and repeated affirmations that the circle must be unbroken. Lastly, we have the method of teaching. This is implementing action-based instruction, having critical conversation leading to the awareness of a globalized interconnectedness. This is done through social action initiatives, community service, critical discussions in IRC, and Harambe, all centered on action and change. These 3 pieces of the Freedom School curriculum lead to a reversal of traditional ideology within the education system. So you're probably asking yourself, why is all of this important? I'm going to give you some key takeaways from this presentation. First, it's that history matters. By enlightening interns about the history of the CDF Freedom Schools, its connection to the civil rights movement, and the role and contribution of youth and children in the movement, they will know where they came from and how important it is to move ahead in a positive way. Next, it's important to note that culturally responsive teachers see themselves as part of the community. Therefore, they see teaching as a way to give back to the community. If you didn't realize, we learned that culturally responsive pedagogy is empowering, transformative, and emancipatory within teacher preparation. The critical literacy framework of Freedom Schools encourages teachers of Black children to reconsider literacy instruction as problem-posing, where relationships between power and literacy are questioned, while also teaching literacy skills. Freedom Schools create a setting for dialogue about topics and a place to ask questions and fully engage in discussion to gain understanding. Freedom Schools also serve as a platform for inclusive, culturally relevant pedagogical practices and curricula. These help build a classroom culture that supports student achievement and influences students' motivation to read. Lastly, the Freedom School environment helps and provides Black students with developed age-appropriate critical agency for participation in today's civil rights movement. This in turn creates a positive view of self for Black students. We know that there is a need for multicultural education, but what do we do now? First, we need to teach and address issues of power structures and racism in schools to help ensure that all students receive an equitable education. Second, teachers must examine their own identity, acknowledge their own biases, and identify how their place of authority has influence on students. Third, teachers must address the needs of their students of color by supplementing the curriculum with resources that allow children to see themselves in print. Lastly, professional development must be continuous for not only teacher candidates and in-service teachers, but for teacher educators alike. By looking at Freedom Schools, we can learn how to design and implement culturally relevant curriculum, as well as how to prepare teachers to teach in culturally relevant and socially just ways.